So let us continue. Our next presentation is like a summary of what we have covered today. So I will ask Ignacio Martínez to explain us where the world is standing according to all the agreements we have covered today, which are many. So this topic is called the new global economic agenda, delivered by our friend and partner Jose Antonio Ignacio Martinez Cortez, who has a PhD degree in foreign economics or international economics for the Universidad Complutense in Madrid. After concluding his master's degree in foreign trade and undergraduate in international relationships and economics for the UNAM, he also has one specialty in economic integration in the so-called Colegio de Mexico. He's a professor researcher for the UNAM in International Relationship Department when he coordinates the area of international economy. He's a coordinator of a laboratory economics and business, and is a coordinator of international policy axis of the network China, Latin America, and the Caribbean. He has 30 years of experience in foreign trade, global economy, political economy, international business. He has published 19 books and 63 papers in specialized journals. The most recent book is Relationship between China, Latin America, and Caribbean, the three scenarios of China 2030. The indexes and indicators of numeric readings of the world, and many more, rules of origin, regulation of trade and regional agreements. His current research project is Agenda Mexico 2030, Perspectives and Projections of Stakeholders and the Factors on the New International Dynamics. He also writes in different newspapers and CNN. He didn't include this, but I know that. Well, it is a great pleasure to have Ignacio here with us again. Thank you very much, Mauricio. Well, you've had a very long journey. I don't want to, well, I'm gonna talk for 4 hours, not 5. Okay. So today we woke up with a piece of news at almost 1 o'clock in the morning, stating that the Congress granted to Mr. Trump, the text was released of one negotiation mechanism concluded by U.S., Mexico, and Canada. Here, my dear friend Juan Antonio, I don't know if this is a treaty or it is not a treaty, or yes, but it doesn't have the word or like agreement, or the trading is not there. Or those are the acronyms of the three countries, but it doesn't have like the formal words. Okay, so this is important to mention, but this is going to modify the trade multilateral spectrum based on what the countries are negotiating in the framework of the WTO. In the next meeting that will take place, the WTO on the 30th of November, 1st and 2nd of December, in the multilateral negotiation will include the negotiation of WTA to incorporate what has been negotiated in the TPP, in the TLQE, QWE, and in the new mechanism, trade mechanism between U.S., Mexico, and Canada, plus the ZETA, the European Union and Canada. The new the agreement of the European Union, this will modify the rules of the WTO. So how our money is. What is the situation of our money? I apologize to Mauricio because at the end, this is what we want to cover in this kind of meetings. What is the situation of the cash flow? What the profit, the investment? So what do we have in this perspective? So see how the behavior of wealth, taking into account that the GDP is not like the wealth generated by a country during a specific period of time. We need to take care of the flow and capital because 2019 it is not going to be a promising year. So mainly because here in Mexico there was like a huge debate because someone, now a very important politician, says that the country is bankrupt. So all the implications of this. So reading all the financial information 1 year ago, because the central bank will reduce the expectation of growth from 2.3 to 1.9. So taking into account that before on the previous day it was agreed on a new trade mechanism in the North American countries. So we shouldn't believe that this agreement will pull the economy. It is not true. The central bank announced at 10 a.m. that the economic behavior of Mexico is not promising. If we take into account that there's other indicators like the reference rates that the central bank, the Fed, increases the threshold, announcing that 2019 it will be in the ceiling of 3%. And this implies that the interest rate with consumption plus investment. So inflation increases in Mexico, the perspective of growth is reduced, and the interest rate will inhibit the consumption. So what's the expectation for the Mexican economy because the Fed increased the interest rate? This week we'll have the Mexican Central Bank meeting, who will take measures based upon this. So these are the main banks that are in the same line than the Fed. How is Mexico? I don't know if the Mexican economy is bankrupt, because sometimes someone will be afraid of this, but it's under a slowdown. So one exercise that we did in the lab, I was listening how you were like disturbed by the microphone. Yeah, thank you. Because I just please help me to see if I did the exercise wrong. Well, during the second quarter of 2017, the Mexican economy increased 3%. In the second quarter of 2018, the Mexican economy increased 1.6%. If we have a growth rate the Mexican economy compared only the 2 quarters, the 2 second quarters, 2018 vis-a-vis 2017, the calculation is that Mexican economy, so don't be afraid, was reduced its wealth in 87%. So, and this is very important to consider. So, I am not an apologist for beyond phobia and phobias in order to take into account what we foresee in the future in the first quarter of 2019. We need to analyze very carefully what's the current account of the country. Well, I was told by my friends from the government that the country is not bankrupt. Why? The International Monetary Fund extended a letter of credit to Mexico on the 12th of December. $84,000 billion is what IMF says to Mexico. Please use it when it's necessary. Well, be careful. Well, letter of credit, inflation, an upward inflation, upward interest rate, depreciation of wealth. And in this announcement on the previous, like yesterday, of this agreement, the exchange rate was appreciated in 10% only in these recent hours. It could be something promising. So how's the perspective of the global economy? Well, we have had 3 or 4 specialists. They are the true specialists of China. And we need to analyze that what China is doing with respect to the U.S.
So we can see what kind we have. Have good Wi-Fi signal here, but if you see the bars of Wi-Fi signal beyond the operator, the Chinese company that puts the chip in the telephone. 5 years ago, it was the second one, and today it's the first one at worldwide level. The conflict between China and the United States, it's not strictly of commercial nature. There is a series of 3 Chinese companies putting at a stake cybersecurity of the United States in the U.S. internal market. Why? Trump is using one of his powers that was not used in the past. So the executive power in the White House blocks the sale of a U.S. company to a company that has behind a Chinese company, Maxcom. What does Maxcom provokes in the United States? They provide these semiconductors, to U.S. companies. So, if the Chinese company is acquiring the main U.S. company supplying this kind of digital products, China has in its hands cybersecurity of the United States. And this is the starting point. 2022 is the first stage of the first level of China for 2030, and the core part of this phase is 2025, with the famous plan of 2025 related to what the Asian country wants to have a higher participation in the world economics, sorry. That's where China is found with these growth rates compared to Mexico or Brazil. We need to take that into consideration. This is very important. Comparing it to what we are going to find in the future negotiations between US and China. Now, talking about agreements, and it is not analyzing Mexico's trade agreements with other countries, but to analyze what's the trend with these unilateral or bilateral agreements. If you get into the USDA website, this website has all the legal basis of the United States for worldwide operations. A lot of people got shocked when Trump imposed tariff to 35 countries. There are some colleagues with whom I have had some debates in the sense that Trump is not as bad. You cannot defend him. But the United States, it's the sole country that legally tells you how they are going to act along the year at commercial level. March the 8th of each year, the White House submits two important documents. One of them is the trade report of the former year. In that document, another source is included, the trade agenda for the present year. So this March the 8th, the trade report of 2017 was submitted. That same day, they presented the trade agenda for 2018. The commercial report of 2017 states that regarding that investigation started in October 2016. Pay attention to the year. Related to that investigation started in October 2016 and that was completed in February 2017. They state that 35 countries are unloyally competing in the U.S. market. In the trade agenda for 2018, it is stated that the U.S. president, based on the trade law of 1974, will convoke these countries to a dialogue to see if they are truly unloyally competing. And this is from May the 1st to the 30th of that same month. Only 6 countries sat to negotiate with the United States. The rest, according to the WTO, were sued in Geneva. Since the year 2000, a very important section of the law was not used that dates back to 1973, Section 2.2 of the Trade Law of 1962. Section 232 says that the U.S. government will impose trade sanctions due to security reasons. But this is not something new that Trump is doing, something that Obama inherited to Trump. So Trump only used the legal framework of the United States. And why am I mentioning this? In the same way the United States has completed the NAFTA with Canada and Mexico, they are going to resume TIPP and the TPP. This is going to be the big transatlantic partnership. It was imposed the first. We have the TPP now related to the 30 negotiated chapters, and we have the agreement with Canada and the European Union. And this is why the WTO is calling them regional mega agreement, exclusion agreements. This will give rise to the creation of new regional agreements due to the way they were organized. Either the WTO modernizes or new agreements will overcome WTO. What do we have in the TPP? If you translate the main chapters that are non-trade articles from the TPP, you are going to find them in other agreements. And I made an exercise of what Mexico negotiated with the TPP, Teleque, and now this new trade mechanism. So we have PYMEs or SMEs, regulatory factors, transparency, anti-corruption. In Mexico, we have a lot to say about this topic. In corruption, Mexico loses 6% of its GDP. And we also have telecommunications, e-commerce, new investment mechanisms, just to quote some of them. This within the TPP framework, as Alejandro Ruiz mentioned, in the TPP. Something relevant of the TPP, and I really invite you to see Exhibit or Annex 3, Paragraph C of the TPP. There you will find a key for many businesses. I don't get into that area, but I'm just mentioning net cost value and transaction value. With that formula determined to calculate transaction value, which is just a projected formula. Based on the transaction value, the TPP has 15 new forms of rules of origin. That's the big business. We need to calculate at accounting level and demonstrate at customs that the goods comply with this new rule of origin method. The original NAFTA had 4 rules of origin. The TPP has 15 new origin rules. Now we have 19 rules of origin and an additional one with the new trade mechanism, which is how to prove at salary level, the transaction value of a final product, which is a vehicle. How do we do that? To consider what we pay to a worker and thus comply with the rule of origin for the automotive sector. So the TPP, TTIP, and the new NAFTA is resulting in 20 new forms of rules of origin to determine net cost value or transaction value. And the key is in the exhibit number 3, letter C of the TPP. I made an exercise how the agreement between Mexico and the European Union of 2000 is and how the new agreement closed now in last June. If we cross the information between the TPP and Teleque, we will find many linked chapters. This is at the end of this presentation. So, how Teleque is showing us rules of origin. For me, out of those negotiated agreements, the key is in rules of origin. I don't want to go deeper into this subject, but rules of origin is providing the foreign company that national treatment to sell at the destination market to demonstrate and provide that preferential treatment. Well, they need to show that certificate of rules of origin. So at customs, we should calculate the transaction value, net cost value, submit the certificate of rules of origin, and then you know very well you have the single counter of foreign trade of each country. Additionally, we have trade facilitation mechanisms, single counter for foreign trade of respective country, plus rules of origin. What do we have? Flow, earnings, investment. So let's see this. We have a product from the European Union, €500,000. These goods are with the R1, L1. You have 3 options. You abandon the merchandise, you return it, or you pay its respective tariff of 20%. Well, you know here you need to make your calculation from euros to pesos and pesos to euros in Mexico. Based on that calculation, you will pay 20% of its trade value by the transaction value determining its value at customs. Using the RU1, if you have RU1, you have the tariff preference of 1%. So this is the new benefits that we have in Teleque. And it also provokes some other changes, like specific rule of origin that was not present in the past. Taking advantage of the TPP, this is true. The European Union is in the European continent. What do? In those 3 negotiated agreements, Chile, Canada, and Mexico, so they incorporate rules of origin of the TPP in those 3 agreements. These rules of origin are not within the WTO, so they will necessarily incorporate these rules of origin in their multilateral processes. Now, in the TPP, what do we have? About the agreement of the United States and the European Union. You can see the new topics that will mark the trend between Washington and Brussels. And this negotiation process will be resumed next year, considering that the Republican Party will win elections in the Congress on November the 6th. And from there to 2020, the election. What do we have in the trade agreement of Mexico, the United States, and Canada? The topics that were negotiated are divided here in 4 big sections. Traditional topics, which are strictly custom processes, where we have the highest cooperation between Mexico and the United States is in customs topics. As you know these very well. Appraisal in customs, self-valuation, and their valuation as well. In the customs valuation, we have Palermo Agreement, which refers to fight transnational organized crime. So we have these topics and what I call NAFTA 19, which are strictly customs topics. Next topic, those of big opportunity. Here we have big investment topics. The energy sector, gas, electricity, oil. How we are going to attract investment to Coatzacoalcos, the southeast region of Veracruz, of those 1,000 new companies that are arriving to Veracruz, 43 million US dollars in Salina Cruz, in Tapachula, and Coatzacoalcos. Out of these 43 millions, 19,000 are in Coatzacoalcos, along with piping and duct imports. Linking duct or piping imports with rules of origin. How do you combine? If you're importing piping, 1 million transaction. If you import it with rules of origin, you are not paying 20% of this million. You will have that tariff preference, so you will not pay anything. You will have to demonstrate by the transaction value the origin of the goods. And you know this very well, between a linked company and in the customs, how you demonstrate this. We're using the accounting part in international trade. Those are sensitive topics for negotiations. Something that you represent, temporary entrance of persons, business persons. In the migration form, it changes. Business persons in Mexico. Look, we need to analyze with this new trade mechanism sensitive topics. a very important topic to stress out is public sector purchases. There are many countries that are undergoing crisis, but they will not close the business. Companies close, the government doesn't. So one of your main customers are the governments. So how SMEs are in government purchases with the new trade mechanism, telecommunication vis-a-vis digital or e-commerce. We need to explore. And I'm just mentioning this, and I don't get into these topics usually. At tax level, how you are going to issue an invoice if you're importing a book. Who you are going to bill to. Marshall Funds, you have a book from Spain to Mexico, but you will sell it to the United States. All this spectrum changes between the relationship of e-commerce and telecommunications. Now, critical topics. And we get back to this article 101, Exhibit 300A, Automotive Sector. How much does it cost? You have a car with 15,000 parts. 9,000 of them are transformed in Mexico. So Trump says, let's leave behind Exhibit 300A because it was 65% non-including the engine. The new rule of origin of the automotive sector says, rule of origin for North America goes from 62.5 to 65%. Sorry, 75%. 45% of it should be U.S. parts. How do you calculate by means of rules of origin this new composition of parts? How you demonstrate to the U.S. customs that the finished product is complying with that rule of origin. And I underscore, the key is now in 401 of the new agreement. Left behind the previous annex, and the new annex will permeate at international level. And out of the 17 chains of value at international level, the most important one is the assembly industry, the final car. The second one is parts, and the third one linked to the automotive sector will be telecommunications. The fourth, electronics, which is also linked to the automotive sector. What do we have in the spectrum of these four agreements for Mexico? All these agreements will create a new trade policy. Regardless who comes on the 1st of December to the new administration, they don't have any room for action at trade policies because the three negotiated agreements indicate that either we have changes in this legal framework or this legal framework was negotiated within these agreements. All this legal framework, along with elements and articles, will be modified to include those negotiated topics in those three agreements. And I stress out, it is not treaties themselves of Mexico with. But what will cause these agreements at international level with other countries? The Trans-Pacific Partnership cannot do it by TPP. The agreement between Mexico and the European Union cannot be without the Z, the agreement between Canada and the European Union. The Z cannot exist without the trade agreement between the European Union and Chile. Then, all these agreements will modify the structure of the WTO, causing the WTO to get modernized. And they agreed to initiate this the last day of November and the first days of December in order to implement those changes. A very important actor in the worldwide economy, which is China. The main country investing in telecommunications is this Asian country. The OECD states that China in 2030 will be the international leader in the technology sector. A study about China considering three scenarios with the MFI, the World Bank, and the OECD is that China starts taking off in 2050, having the basis in 2030. And this based on 2022. But 2022 is based on October the 24th, 2017, on the 19th Congress of the Communist Party, because President Xi Jinping put those pillars. And the first
phase of this 250 starts in 2020. It is not for free. The conflict of Trump with because they are causing China not to reach this stage by 2025, which is that like China will be the technological leader in telecommunication as of this date. Only I'm mentioning this because this was covered this morning. And then the great strategy is the new Silk Route. So concluding, so we foresee 2019 in wealth terms with a drop, in the sense that the protectionism that is causing that the foreign trade will lose the impetus, and then the economies will have a new economic nationalism. Well, this is stated by Trump last week in the UN, where there's this economic patriotism fostering the U.S. economy from the discourse to the fact. So this favors the NAFTA and commercial mechanism, which is not a treaty. And this is based on Section 232 that comes from the Trade Act of 1962 of the U.S. Okay, thank you very much. Thank you for your attention. esos horarios, o sea, es imposible. Well, thank you very much. On behalf UC&CS America, I want to grant this certificate to Ignacio Martínez Cortés for his participation as a speaker in international regulation Module 6 of Global Economy, signed on the 1st of October 2018 by Mr. Mauricio Mubarak. Thank you.